Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, your devil's advocate. Also, I run a great little organization called the Independence Institute. Check us out at independenceinstitute.org. Well, it's all starting up again. The new year, you had the hangover from the day before, and then the session starts here in Colorado. Grab your wallets. Who knows what's going to happen? From Channel 4, Shaun Boyd, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
And from the AP, Ivan Moreno. You're related to know Shaun. You
That's
and he,
right.
You guys look alike too. So the AP now is more important, the Associated Press is more important down at the Capitol because so many newspapers no longer have a guy down there keeping an eye on their particular issue. If you're a Western Slope reporter or you're up in the mountains and you're worried about water issues, if you don't report on that, they don't get it anymore because they don't have that many reporters.
That's very true. Over the years at the Statehouse, a lot of newspapers have just pulled back their people, and it's a very telling sign. You walk over to the press room on the third floor, and then you see a sign of all of the papers that used to be there that are no longer there. So,
which papers no longer send somebody?
Well, the Daily Camera doesn't have a person there. The Coloradoan doesn't have someone there.
Fort Collins.
Yeah, Greeley Tribune.
Longmont Times
yeah,
Call,
Longmont
and
Times
a couple
Call.
of those other papers.
Yeah.
What about Pueblo Chieftain?
Pueblo Chieftain has someone there.
Okay.
There's also someone there from the Durango Herald. But a lot of papers that used to be there are not anymore. So they increasingly rely on AP coverage to cover more of the statewide issues. And what I've noticed is some of the times I write a story, and what they do is they pick up my story and then they localize it and insert a paragraph or two that is relevant to their readership. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But while newspapers are cutting back, it's amazing because local TV news has been reinvesting more and more into the political scene. That you guys have 15 full-time reporters now at Channel 4 covering just the Capitol.
Right.
It's tough.
Wouldn't that be great? But no.
It's a little different for television because you can go into the policy. You need something visual. And
Absolutely, and that makes
what's the big difference covering it for TV?
I think, for example, the reapportionment and redistricting, how do you visualize that for our viewers? If you're just showing them maps the entire time, they're going to tune out. So that does personal angles, you find the business that's maybe impacted by a certain law. We always like that in TV, and that makes the story certainly more appealing to our viewers. They're going to pay attention more.
You always have the great B-roll, too, the B-roll of legislators doing a lot of
this. Sitting around a meeting room that's so exciting to watch, right?
Or that, or the B-roll of the other cameras that are there, so that it's important. All right, let's get into the meat of it. This year is going to be an interesting year. The presidential election is coming up. This is going to be Hickenlooper's second year. There'll be no excuses that he doesn't know the ropes any longer. There's going to be some big issues. Let's talk about the fun one first. There are a group of Republicans who want to join some Democrats and push through a civil unions bill. It's interesting when the Democrats had control of the House, the Senate, and the governorship, they could have passed a civil unions bill anytime they wanted to, and they didn't. Last year, there was this big fight. It got all the way through the Senate, and I forgot who sponsored it in the House.
Died in committee.
Ferrandino.
Yeah, Ferrandino. Yeah, Stedman and Ferrandino were the two sponsors of it. And it died in a House committee by a party line vote. But I was there for that vote, and I will tell you, the Republicans that voted against it, many of them on that committee, it was a very difficult decision for them. And privately, some of them admitted that they supported it. So, had it made it out of committee, it would have passed in the House. I mean, everybody talked about that.
Right,
there
so
were enough votes.
You're convinced?
I am fully convinced. If it had made it out of that committee, it would have passed.
And keep in mind, the Republicans only have a simple one-vote majority in the House. It already passed in the Senate. We know no characters have changed here. It would pass in the House, you're convinced, if it just got to the floor.
Right.
Whoa.
If it's sent to the right committee.
Why didn't it get to the floor?
Well, I think Republicans seem to have done a very good job of keeping their votes together and their caucus together. I think you could credit House leadership for that. And it seemed like, even though people could argue that the Republicans on that committee who voted against it seem to have been having a hard time, at the end of the day, they voted against it. And I, one lawmaker recently told me that was all just an act. So who knows whether...
What do you mean it was all just an act?
Well, that they were just pretending to make it seem like they were having a hard time with it, But so it's hard to say how close it really came to getting into the House, or if Republicans were really locked down. You know, it's interesting because at the end of the day, a lot of these Republicans have to vote their districts. They have to vote their constituents, and they come, some of them, from very, very conservative districts in El Paso County. So you could always argue that, you know, you have to do the right thing, but at the end of the day, these are people who have to answer to the people who put them in office as well.
But it went to State Affairs, is that right?
No, it went to the
didn't.
Judiciary.
Yeah, it went to Judiciary, yeah.
And now this is coming back, and it'll pass the Senate again, certainly, and it'll come back to the House. Will it be sent to the same committee? Any speculation?
I think it will be sent to the same committee. I think
So nothing's going to change.
Yeah, nothing's going to change. So I think, you know, there's talk about the support that from Republicans this time around, although most of them are not lawmakers, so they won't have a vote. But there's talk about how there's more support from Republicans for this bill. At the end of the day, you have to get support from people who are in that committee. And it's, as far as I know, I think it's the same Republicans were on that committee. So unless they change their minds,
Was it only one vote?
Yeah,
one tiny
it's 6-5.
Yeah.
All right.
Or 7-6 when it was one vote.
This has been an issue. Interesting was it 06, I'm trying to remember, when it was on the ballot, the idea of civil unions. There was also a ban, a constitutional ban on gay marriage,
Right.
and one on civil unions. The gay marriage one passed overwhelmingly. Now there's a ban in the Constitution. If you want to change that, you have to go to a vote of the people. But the initiative to allow civil unions got killed. What's changed that has made it so much more palatable in just a few years?
Well, you know, I think supporters will tell you that 4 or 5 years is a long time in politics. And, you know, you're right that 4 or 5 years ago in 2006, the voters here voted to ban gay marriage and put that in the Constitution. But their argument is that it's been a long time. And you've seen a lot more states around the country pass civil unions legislation. So they really feel like they have their momentum on their side, even if it's just been a few years, which again is an eternity in politics.
And I think the fact that you've got a coalition of Republicans, some of them very conservative Republicans, you know, Mario Nicolai, for example, who are talking about this and saying, hey, I'm in support of this, shows times have changed.
When you have very respected Republicans in the Senate, Nancy Spence, who has said, you know, let's do this and let's get it
Right.
done. Well, let me throw out a political part of this. A lot of the money from the left comes from Tim Gill and his machine, and he's mostly, as you know, he's a gay entrepreneur, and he has put millions and millions and millions of dollars into Colorado. Wouldn't it be wise for House Republicans, just politically speaking, forget about the issue, if they voted on the issue, he's going to take his money and go to the next state and work someplace else, meaning which it's going to be easier for Republicans to retain their House seats and maybe even gain some.
It's an interesting strategy you've thrown out there, right?
Is it?
I think you make a good point. And I mean, one of the things that was very telling last year when people came to testify in support of this civil unions legislation, you had people like the college Republicans coming to testify in favor of this. So if you look at it long term, these are the people who are probably going to be running for office for Republicans, you know, 5-10 years from now. So it's, you know, it almost makes you think that maybe this is an issue that Republicans don't want to keep fighting against, you know.
Well, and I mean, it's not like you don't have gay Republicans out there, too.
There are no gay Republicans.
There are plenty of
There
fiscal
are no gay
conservatives who are gay.
Republicans.
There are. I know some.
There are no bald Republicans. All right, moving along, the way it's going to affect the election, let's talk a little bit about the Senate seats, or excuse me, the U.S. House seats. Now, we've got a few folks that are coming up. Kaufman is going to be challenged. Scott Tipton is going to be challenged. We're finding that it's a natural progression. You go to the state House, you might go to the state Senate, then you run for United States House. I mean, certainly Kaufman did a great job from Treasurer to Secretary of State. Who's going to be pulled out and try to run for against any of these sitting House members? And if so, what fun things are they going to do to try to get their name out? I know that Saul Pace, for one, is looking to fight Scott Tipton in the Western Slope. And who's likely to go against Kaufman? I'm trying to remember.
McCloskey?
McCloskey is going against Kaufman.
Representative McCloskey's running
Lumberg's
against
talked about
Kaufman.
running against Polis, and Schaefer is going to be running against Gardner. So you've got four, potentially four, if Lumberg actually decides to go through, state lawmakers who are going to be running for Congress during this legislative session, which, you know, might create an interesting dynamic in terms of, will they be trying to appeal to their base with certain bills that they know won't go through, but they'll introduce anyway? The other question I have is this senior homestead tax exemption that's hanging out there that the governor has said to do away with.
Explain what that is, because that's been around, it seems, every year when we keep putting it on hold. What exactly is this
So
exemption?
it was suspended 3 years ago. Am I right, Ivan?
Yeah, it was a few years ago.
Right, and it
This was a tax reduction for older people and their property.
And it's not a means tested. It's not an asset tested. It's a tax reduction for seniors that own homes.
Basically, the way it works, and voters approve this, is that homeowners 65 years and older can deduct 50% of the first $200,000 of the value of their home in their property tax. So that's the way that it works.
So when we pay some property tax, we can write it off.
Yeah, exactly.
But for the last 3 years,
it hasn't
they
been
haven't been able to.
Right. And
why so?
Because they voted to suspend it each year because of budget woes, right? So this year, the thinking was it would be reinstated. The governor said as part of his budget announcement that we would suspend it again. It's $100 million, so it's a good chunk of money. In the scheme of things, maybe not, but it's still $100 million. So the governor said, let's suspend it. Republicans are opposed to that, but it will be interesting to see what some of the Democrats who are running for Congress are going to do on this, because are they going to vote against something that helps seniors?
And seniors vote. Young people are nice, and they might become legislators later on in life, but right now seniors vote, and seniors don't want to pay as much in taxes. So,
but it's not exactly like a tax increase for them in the sense that it has been suspended for 3 years now, so it isn't as though they're used to it right now, and suddenly it's going to be taken away. So, but still,
Well, I mean, and the interesting part of this is the House Republicans really have they really have an advantage here, because they've said they're not going to vote to suspend it again. So, and it has to go, there has to be a bill in order to suspend it again, and they've just seemed very, very committed to not passing legislation to do that.
The question is, where does the money come from?
Exactly,
and
but they definitely have leverage for negotiations, and I think that they've really seized on this issue, and we'll see what they do with it.
Well, this is a popular tax deduction from a crowd that votes. They want this. Republicans are playing for the next election. Well, doesn't the same thing hold true for the Democrats?
Well, that's what I'm interested to find out. How will someone, like a Schaefer or a Pace vote on this, given they're running this year?
And what could ultimately happen too is state revenue forecasts the last few times have shown an uptick. I mean, that was the reason why the last time a revenue came down in December, a lot of the education cuts were able to be eliminated. So who knows, maybe the next revenue forecast, I think, is in March. If things continue to go up, maybe this becomes a moot issue and it could be restored.
$100 million never becomes
well,
a moot issue.
Well, but they did restore, just over $100 million. The governor is talking about restoring to education that he had proposed cutting. So,
that was because the forecasts came in.
But the March forecast will decide. It hinges on that March forecast, what's going to happen. I do think that Medicaid will be an issue regardless, because it's grown by 70% over the last 4 years.
I'm always amazed, the job that you guys have to do. There's fun stories that people have an interest right away. The civil unions. I mean, people either love it or they hate it.
Beer.
Oh, beer. Yeah. But when it comes down to it, there are a few things that are so critical, but they're so detail oriented and in the weeds. The Medicare is one of our big driving forces.
Medicaid,
is
right.
Medicaid. So tell me, what is it that they're trying to? What's likely to happen?
I don't know, because what Republicans have talked about at this point is potentially asking for a waiver on some of these federal rules that are attached to Medicaid, in terms of you can't do asset testing, for example, on Medicaid. So what if we change some of these federal
so in other
rules?
Words, Bill Gates gets to have Medicaid like anybody else.
That drops some people off. Well, it's also means-based too. So, so if you have income coming in, it is means-based at this point. It's just not the asset-based. So the talk is, is there a way that the state could potentially get a waiver from some of these federal rules that are attached to Medicaid, which would mean, potentially fewer people on our Medicaid rolls, less of our money going toward Medicaid.
Who's championing that?
Republicans are at this point.
And that's a tough thing to sell.
It is, because really you're talking about something that needs to happen at the federal level. This isn't something that can happen at the state level. So what they've been doing is leaning on the governor, putting pressure on him to go after this waiver. At this point, I don't think anybody's gone to our congressional delegation and asked them to maybe push for changes in the federal rules. But, you know, this is, you know, President Obama's, you know, signature law out there. And so the idea of changing some of these rules that are attached to it seems unlikely at this point.
How big is Medicaid as far as our budget?
It's a third. It's a third of our budget right now, and growing all the time.
Yeah, what's interesting is, so next in the proposed budget by Governor Hickenlooper, about 82% of increases in new spending is from Medicaid. So the general fund is about $7.4 billion. New spending is about, going to Medicaid is about 82%. So a lot of the increases in spending next year are going to Medicaid. Now, the
It's
governor,
the only area you can't cut. You can cut education, you can cut corrections.
Yeah.
You can't cut Medicaid.
Well, and
So-
technically, you can't cut education as well, and so I'm interested to see when the CEA, the Education Association, if there's going to be more cuts, says, wait a second, there's a constitutional provision. Amendment 23 says you can't do that. They've given Hickenlooper and the Democrats a lot of leeway. There were $200 million worth of cuts to education. They said, well, that's okay. Any more than that, at some point they're going to push back. Any sense?
from
I think they
education
do.
folks?
I think they push back every time.
I'm talking about a legal challenge.
Actually, a legal challenge to it.
Yeah,
based-
I mean, the Lobato case, obviously this is a case where there's a lawsuit.
Explain the Lobato case real quickly.
Well, the Lobato case is a group of school districts and parents are suing the state, saying that that Colorado is violating its constitution, its promise to provide a thorough and uniform education system. Now, there's debate over what that exactly means, but basically their argument is that the education system in Colorado is severely underfunded, and that the way that basically the system that lawmakers have for allocating money is irrational. Now, recently a Denver District Court judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, and this is getting appealed to the state Supreme Court with huge ramifications potentially to the state budget.
And so you have Hickenlooper joining with the Republican A.G. Southers saying we need to challenge this.
Okay, so it would be devastating to the state budget. It would be essentially the entire state budget would go toward education under the models that...
And still there wouldn't be enough money for education according to the CEA, so that would be good.
Yeah.
There are also some money-saving ideas, including personnel changes and how Colorado is not very flexible when it comes to eliminating jobs or contracting out services. I know Bill Owens tried to do something and it didn't work. What's on tap for this year?
There is some talk of revising some of those rules associated with personnel this year. And, we had talked, it's sort of one of those sleepers there that people don't pay much attention to, but I think ultimately could become, a battle.
Yeah, Colorado has a constitution that when the state employs somebody, that becomes a position and you can't get rid of it. If you want to hire somebody, you usually have to hire from somebody who's already employed. So you can't bring in fresh blood. You can't contract out. If you're looking for savings, you want to get into the personnel system so that you can contract out some of the stuff. Hickenlooper has been good at this when he was mayor. Does he have what it takes to get it passed this time? Well,
we'll see. I mean, because the personnel system and some of those rules are in the Constitution, in order to change that, the legislature has to have a referred measure and has to go to voters. And obviously, this is something that Hickenlooper wants. He'll have to campaign for it, and we'll see if he's successful.
So you need both the House
and the Senate.
2/3. 2/3 in both to put it on the ballot.
Yeah.
And then you and I get to vote on it this fall.
That's right.
And last time it didn't pass because nobody knew what it was.
And that's the challenge, is how do you make it
how do you make people care?
Yeah.
What surprises? Well, first let's talk about Hickenlooper. This is going to be his second go at the show. So he knows the ropes. He was masterful, I thought, by doing a whole lot of nothing last year. He just kind of stepped back, seemed like he knew what was going on, but didn't really champion any one law, didn't try to stop anything. How is he perceived by the legislators, and what's going to be different this year?
Well, I think he surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but he so far has gotten more praise and criticism, even from Republicans. And I think that he has, it seems that he has managed the fact that he is presiding over a divided legislature very well. And maybe that's why he hasn't necessarily been very aggressive or assertive in championing anything, because he knows that the Democrats control the Senate and the Republicans control the House. So maybe he has to do more in terms of compromising, which was, Ritter had Democrats controlling both chambers, and you talk to Republicans. There are very few Republicans that I've talked to who liked Ritter, so maybe this actually plays to Hickenlooper's advantage, the fact that he has a divided legislature.
Well, he's also remarkably popular. I mean, I'm amazed how likable he was as mayor, and while I despise a lot of his policies, including the tax increases he gave us as mayor, it's hard to dislike Hick.
And I think, too, what appeals to Republicans, and you can tell me, John, if this is true, is he's really, he's anti-regulation. He's all about let's reduce regulation. It was something that he, right from the get-go yesterday, if the environment was Ritter's, point, then I think regulation was something that Hickenlooper made a point of.
Which bodes well for personnel reform. I mean, these are boring, god-awful things that are stuck in the Constitution, but they get in the way of saving money and get in the way of doing business.
And hiring. I mean, these are about businesses, too, a lot of these regulations. And Republicans, this is going to be their priority, is reducing regulations on businesses this next session. They've got several bills that they're going to be introducing right off the bat that will do that. So, and you've got a governor who has said this is something that, is very important to me, is very important to the businesses of this state, and is going to make a difference in terms of jobs.
Talk to me a little bit about how they're setting themselves up for next year. This is an election year. Election years are wonderful. And they've really got two things to worry about. They've got their own elections to worry about, because every vote gets tracked. And we were talking about the civil unions bill. Is that one that's going to get checked off here? The homestead exemption, is that going to get checked off? You know that no matter what you do, there's going to be a flyer that says Senator Shaun Boyd voted in favor of this god-awful law, or if she doesn't, then you go against it. All the smear ads are coming. Also, though, we have a presidential race where Colorado is going to be a pivotal state. How does that change what goes on down there? Can you tell me that people don't actually think about, how's this bill going to help me when I get reelected this fall?
Well,
particularly the Republicans
yeah.
who have one tiny little vote majority.
Well, I think it does, but you could also make an argument that it matters every year. I mean, votes that Republicans cast in the House last year could still be potentially used against them next session. So you could, in a lot of ways, a lot of these lawmakers are always running for re-election. So I think that they always have that in the back of their mind, But again, given the split legislature here in Colorado, it's almost very easy for them to vote for something and know that it's really not going to go anywhere, and they ultimately don't have much blame thrown at them.
Yes and no, but it's going to be interesting, because this year, there's, with one vote majority, I'm wondering what gets held up. Now, Frank McNulty's the speaker. Amy Stevens is the majority leader. And now she has to fight within her own party. Why? Because of the redistricting. And this is something we probably want to touch on. Right. The redistricting maps that were...
She's going to be in a primary.
She's going to be in a primary.
Against an incumbent.
Against an incumbent. Now, this is happening in a couple seats. The one with Keith King, and I think it was Bill Cadman. Keith King, Senator King said, I'm not going to fight against my dear friend Bill Cadman. I'm going to take a step back and let you have, the Republican nomination for this district. But there are a few, including Amy Stevens and Marcia Looper, they're going to go head to head. So here they are serving in the same chamber for the next year, knowing that whatever they do, they're writing little notes about how they're going to fight each other. How do you get business done that way, or can you feel it down there?
Well, I mean, that's the question, is how, what the next session is going to look like with so many people running for re-election. I mean, maybe nothing will get done. I don't know.
Well, we can hope. we can hope. Do you see any bills that pop up that are going to cause huge controversy?
Asset is going to come up again. That's the bill dealing with in-state tuition for the children of illegal immigrants. That was a very emotionally charged issue.
Who sponsored it last time? I forget.
It was Senator Giron
And Johnson.
Yeah, and Senator Johnston.
Johnson.
Yeah.
And it got out of the Senate,
He did.
and it died in the House.
Yes. But you know, the interesting thing is it died in the House in a committee where one of the members of that committee, Representative Ramirez, I don't know if he'll sign on to this bill or not, but there's talk that he's actually working with the senators who sponsored this legislation. So, you know, if he signs on as a co-sponsor and he's in the committee that's going to hear this bill, all of a sudden, you know, the chances look very good for this bill.
And I think the Education Committee might be changing up itself this next session, so you might have
And-
some new members on that.
And the
too.
governor's going to sign that. Has he given signals that he would like to give in-state tuition to
I think
illegals?
so. I'm of the mind that I think he
Yeah.
would sign it. I think he's in favor of it.
It's going to be a fun year.
Well, and who knows? Every year beer comes up, right?
What
What's
is
a
it?
session without beer?
Explain to me the beer wars, because I'm always confused about the beer wars. You've got beer distributors, then you've got the supermarkets who want to sell beer.
Right.
I want to buy beer in supermarkets, but the small liquor stores don't want them to do that.
Because they've been set up for, you know, decades under the premise that they were the ones that could sell the full strength. So where do you see liquor stores? A lot of them. They're set up beside King Soopers and Safeways, right? So they've established themselves right by these grocery stores that now would become their competitors. So
Yeah, I want it.
I haven't heard that beer's coming up, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't come up
I love
again
it.
in this session.
Shaun, thank you. Appreciate it. Ivan, thank you. It's always good to know that there's somebody down there writing it down.
Well, thank you for having
You
me.
get paid by the word or
By the paragraph.
By the paragraph.
Yeah.
That's why you have such short paragraphs. Hey, do me a favor, check out the Independence Institute. Go to our webpage, independenceinstitute.org. By all means, tell a friend. Please join me next week. We'll see you then.